Thank you very much, everyone. Audible? Yep. Great. Thank you very much. So I'm Max Borders, and I'm the Executive Director of Social Evolution, which is a nonprofit dedicated to liberating people and solving social problems through innovation, which should be a welcome message to anyone here. Today I'm going to pivot a little bit in my promised title talk about polyarchy and pivot it into something specific that we're actually currently incubating right now. And
I'll take a minute. Keep talking.
And so I've been instructed to keep talking so that we can make sure that we resolve the technical issue of me throwing a Mac into the equation. Let me just talk a moment. There it is. I'll just get started then. So I want to talk about the idea of polyarchy, but specifically connected to the idea of mutual aid. Okay? It's interesting that folks just brought up the idea of a UBI. I personally think that the UBI is a dead letter, but I'm not standing here before you to tell you why. If you want to talk about that afterwards, I'm happy to. But I actually think a better, far superior, and more anti-fragile model is mutual aid. So let me start with this idea. I believe in my bones that the decentralization movement is going to mean the end of ideology, in a sense. It used to be that we had ideas in sort of trickle-down fashion. We call it trickle-down ideology. And what that means is that people who are involved in some sort of victory or conquest over a specific territory had certain kinds of ideas in their head, and that trickled down into the institutional matrix of a country to become essentially whatever that country was going to be. Now, there's some exceptions to that, but that's essentially how it by virtue of revolution or conquest, that is mostly how the world map looked in terms of its relative institutions. So we got the Bolshevik Revolution, for example, and we got the Soviet Empire that lasted, 70 years. And then we have capitalism a relative capitalism in the West, and it seemed never the twain shall meet. We had these ideological binaries, and that was that. And we sort of had ideological war, and we had the Cold War, and so on in the post-war era. But I believe there are two phenomena that are going to change that. We're going to go from the era of ideology and conquest, territorial conquest, to the age of exit. So from the age of voice in the democratic West, or the age of conquest, to the age of exit. Okay? The notion of exit is if you reduce the costs of leaving any given system, then people will leave those systems to try out better systems. And there are two phenomena here. There are territorial aspects of exit, and there are opportunities for cloud exit, I guess you could say, with the decentralization revolution that's been made possible by the advent of blockchain and similar distributed ledger technologies. Okay? So here we have this guy, Albert Hirschman, who came up with this, I consider, the human algorithm of exit, voice, and loyalty. And if you want to change the system from within, if you're a member of that system, you exercise voice. You try to get people to vote your way or whatever. And that's really about expression as a mechanism of social change. But exit is really about being able to leave a system and start a new system and invite people to enter that system, to join you. The costs of migrating from the age of voice and conquest to the age of exit are going down, down, down by virtue of all of the projects that we're working on in this room. And that is a wonderful thing. That means we have laboratories of experimentation all over the world, and we need not argue over ideology. As Joe says, don't argue, build. And as the seasetters say, stop arguing, start seasetting. And as I say at my conference, Voice and Exit, criticize by creating. So there we are. This, I believe, is the human algorithm, and we're seeing it play out before our very eyes. So let me talk about these fancy terms, one of which I learned from Tom W. Bell, who just spoke earlier, polycentricity. And this is the idea that we have these different centers of power representing different centers of institutional matrices. We don't like what's going on in Vermont, we can move over to New Hampshire, for example, and find better institutional climate for, say, business or life. And that polycentric framework means that when it comes to rules attached to territory, there are different centers of power, and we can migrate from among them, and we get certain kinds of arbitrage opportunities from doing this, referred to as jurisdictional arbitrage. That is a wonderful phenomenon because it allows for these complex flows and processes between and among jurisdictions, and we're all familiar with those processes here because we're all in the process, just in some way or the other, are working on these things. But then there's polyarchy, this Belgian thinker that's not very well known, named Paul-Émile Dupuy. Back in right around the time of the U.S. Civil War, was operating in Europe as a sort of liberal thinker, suggested the idea that we no longer have partisan politics or monarchic administration, but we are able to, in our house slippers, choose our own governance. Why would we not want to choose our own governance? If we could get rid of partisan politics tomorrow, this awful tit-for-tat or king of the mountain phenomenon where we, by virtue of vanquishing the other side, the other team in partisan politics, we get to exercise power over everyone else and inculcate with our values. Instead, we simply choose that governance structure, that set of values in a pluralistic framework that we find to be the most amenable to our conception of the good. And this is essentially the idea of polyarchy, or in his term, panarchy. I like the poly better, but because panarchy, there's another term that has to do with environmental stuff, and it gets confusing. So polycentricity and polyarchy are my preferred nomenclature for these. So here we have what I call the exit matrix, okay? And having wonderful people like those in this room who've influenced me means that I'm already thinking about ULEX here, because of Tom. And so here we have a matrix that we can roughly divide things, and this is not perfect, it can be a continuum, but we roughly have territorial services and non-territorial services. Okay? And then on the other axis here we have centralized governance and decentralized governance. Now, what I believe is that we've had this for a very long time, pretty much in the age of voice, particularly in the 20th century. And what we're going to see is more and more movement of activity from these two quadrants to these two quadrants, obviating the centralized to a very great degree, okay? Because the process of decentralization is pushing us up. Why in the world shouldn't we be able, to some degree at least, choose non-territorial services? Why is it that by virtue of being born on a patch of soil, do I have to accept this ridiculous healthcare system that the United States has handed us? Why can't I choose the Singaporean system? Oh, because I was born somewhere and on a certain patch of territory, and those rules automatically ascribed to me, or here in my bones in some weird way? It's absurd. With what you guys are working on right now, we're creating opportunities to move up into this, and also what I'm working on. And I'm eager to tell you about it. But first, let me go back again into the past. I don't want to belabor the past because I consider myself more of a futurist. I want to be forward-looking, and I encourage us all to be forward-looking. But we should look to the past for things that worked. And one of the things that worked great in the 17th and 18th century was the mutual aid society. These friendly societies, mutual aid societies, there were tons of different ones. everything from the Rotarians to the crippled children Scottish Rite Home. I mean, here we have St. Mary's Russian Orthodox Brotherhood, something like that. I mean, there were tons of them. 1 in every 3 people at the peak of the mutual aid movement belonged to a mutual aid society. And then something happened, and it was the 20th century. The 20th century happened, and the welfare warfare state dominated. And that essentially destroyed civil society's answer to welfare, to human welfare. Okay? And I think that is problematic, but here we have an opportunity. So here's what happened historically. We got the Second Bill of Rights. We had FDR come in, and we had his wife involved with the UN, coming up with the Declaration of Human Rights, and we have all these rights that grow on trees, apparently, and require duties of others, but okay, let's not get into any sort of ideological battle because it doesn't matter. If you think that these are all rights, you can construct them in your jurisdiction, and that's okay. We need no longer have these ideological battles. We criticize by creating. We try out the things that we need, but it no longer becomes a hierarchy of aid. We need not live in a hierarchy of aid anymore, or a hierarchy of welfare, or the centralization of welfare is the status quo, and we can and should migrate out of it. So what I'm proposing is a renaissance of sorts, and I believe the people in this room will be a catalyst for it. This is a good friend of mine, Justin Goro, a South African friend who's been an advisor to me, and I really respect his mind. He says, the evolution from nation states and corporations to decentralized networks of smart contracts will transform the human race into a collective hive mind as we internalize the mechanisms of social coordination that once used to be the duty of the crown. But it won't be one where the individual is squashed. In this post-collectivist future, the individual won't be either supreme or irrelevant. Instead, choices of individuals will be so strongly influenced by programmable incentives like the blockchain or holochain or your preferred distributed ledger technology that distinctions between individual welfare and the greater good will lose meaning. And I want us to put that to the test. And I think you guys want that too. So what about Puerto Rico? What does that have to do with Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rico issue? Well, we can imagine the next Puerto Rico if any given person in distress in Puerto Rico or the next place is a member of a mutual aid society that is a global network, then distress relief will be there. Distress relief will be there. Of course, they have charitable stuff happening worldwide, and this is good, and it should still be the case for distress relief. But in terms of rebuilding efforts, in terms of belonging to a global group of sisters and brothers ready and willing to pool resources and to assist for whatever that thing might be, that's going to be, I believe, the future of human welfare, at least to a very great degree. So we can have these non-territorial welfare services carried out through cloud governance. Another picture of Dubai there. I think I've seen 3 of them now. So here we have hotspots. You can imagine the red represents hotspots of activity or distress within this social safety net, this decentralized social safety net. And we can imagine someone in Puerto Rico or on the coast of North Carolina, which is my home state, or Texas, which is the state I currently live in, where a hurricane comes in, and suddenly folks have some kind of need, and they belong to one of these mutual aid societies, and they get assistance. Because there's always something in the world going on that's horrible that's happening to people, and we constantly want to be in a process of lifting each other up as human beings. So here I want to suggest a framework that I believe is perhaps an alternative to a universal basic income. And I won't explain why I think it's a superior model but I'll merely explain the framework. It's called the DISC framework. DISC is an acronym for Distributed Income Support Cooperative. Okay? So if you know what a DAO is, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, this is the analog to that for human welfare, for pooling resources. Members participate in governance. There's a resource fund for the payments of those benefits. So you imagine you're using a technological framework that allows people to pool resources through some form of tokenization. Okay? That pool of resources has a governance process internal to it that ensures good stewardship of those resources. Here's what the welfare state does. Airdrops largesse from the sky, no matter what's on the ground. So sometimes that's fertilizer dropped from the sky into the desert, yielding a desert of shit. That's what often the welfare state does. It creates dependency, creates problems. In the DISC framework, and it rewards bad behavior, because the welfare state doesn't care about what's on the ground. But people who are involved in these human networks care about each other and look after each other and apply local knowledge and the stewardship of resources to better help their fellow human beings ascend. Okay? So aid goes to those in need. The strong help the weak. The many help the few. Aid accompanied by governance, mentorship, and stewardship. Members receive education on the group's interests and ethos, perhaps. Our mutual aid society that I'm going to tell you about is going to have its own ethos and values. We can create and preserve knowledge, values, traditions, and practices, because that will be important to the life and vibrancy of the mutual aid organization. And finally, where there's mutual support and commitment to service, we will become the social safety net. So, the mutual aid society of old gets updated with 20th century governance processes, similar perhaps to holacracy. Brian Robertson is on our board, who's the guy who developed holacracy. Updated with the 21st century technology. Holochain is the one that we're in talks with right now, because that is their agent-centric model seems to be the best for this use case. And updated with 21st century values of inclusion and the reconciliation of diversity and unity. So what do we do as social evolution? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start this mutual aid society, and our first customer is going to be the people in this room, we believe. Anybody who's involved in the decentralization movement, particularly if they're doing stuff in the crypto space, they're all out there doing all these crazy projects. They're living on the edge. They're doing things that are going to get blowback from legacy corporations and legacy governments. And we believe, to lock arms in solidarity for each other, united under a common ethos, that we believe in each other and we believe in this movement. So the three major things we're doing at Social Evolution is personal transformation, so that everything that we do in terms of mutual aid goes to lifting people up as human beings, helping them improve, and allowing themselves to improve themselves. And network community, visibility, a sense of fraternity, and, if you like, sorority, if you're and all of these combined to be this initial mutual aid society that will incubate the DISC technology I described, which we hope will eventually be used around the world. So we believe, though, we need to start with the felt needs of the decentralization space. So let me give you an example. One of our first investors in the pre-sale that we're currently involved in, one of the things that just clicked for him, a friend who's here in the audience, Joel, said to him, look, so this guy has, he is doing a crazy audacious thing, David and Goliath story. He's going to try to do a decentralized alternative to Google. Okay? He has got a Canadian company called Presearch. How audacious is that, going up against Goliath? Well, you know you know that Presearch is going to get crap from Goliath and from Leviathan, both. If he doesn't have people around him who are fearing the same things and sharing the same concerns and pooling resources to go up against Goliath or Leviathan, then he will probably fail. We believe that together, a more united decentralization movement, paradoxically, will be stronger. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to ask our customer group before we actually build these. But the first discs, the first distributed income support cooperatives, will probably be stuff like legal defense, public relations, helping people learn new internal governance processes to make them more robust internally as an organization, and so on. These are going to be the things that our mutual aid society provides, and then we're open sourcing the technology so the world can use it, so that Ma and Paul can use it for their church, so that anybody can use this mutual aid framework powered by a token. So this is the hope, this is the big model. We want to go from a mutual aid society to a global society of mutual aid. Create a membership society with values and organizing principles suitable for the decentralization age. Create a membership society with the DISC mutual aid technology at its core. Incubate ways to improve services to members and help people level up as human beings and to serve each other better. And open source all of our technology to be used by anyone in the world, hopefully to transition humanity into this framework. At least more of humanity into this framework. Obviously, there's going to be local experiments and good old-fashioned welfare, and God bless them. We're in the age of exit. May the best system win. But we want to provide a framework that lifts people up. We believe at Social Evolution that we can become the social safety net. And I'll leave you with a couple of parting thoughts. The first is, when I talked about that ethos, that idea of what does it mean, what are we looking for, what is the vision for the decentralization age? Through the nonprofit Social Evolution, I wrote a book that just came out. Chris Smedley was the first person to own a copy, I'm happy to say, and getting to know him has been a real treat. But I want to encourage anyone, I will give you this book. I have, I think, 35 copies now. I'll give you this book. If you want to donate to Social Evolution, the organization, throw me $5, $10, $20. I'll send you, in exchange, I'll send you a receipt for tax deductibility purposes. But this is my gift to you for anyone who wants it. This is the Decentralist Manifesto. Okay? So that's the first thing. Second thing, we have a pre-sale going on right now. If you want to be a part of this at its genesis, this mutual aid society, we're looking for people who have their heart in the right place, their head in the right place, and want to help us build this beautiful thing that's going to be for humanity. And finally, take a picture of this slide if you like, or write down my email address, max@social-evolution. I didn't put .com in there, but it's .com. And I look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I thank you.